First off, thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate you coming and being a part of our presentation here this evening. We've got roughly a half hour-ish of things to present to you. There was a two-pager outside, so hopefully you picked that up because we'll reference that from time to time tonight as well. I'll also reference the slides up here behind me. But again, as we get done with the slide or the presentation portion, if you'd like to come up and ask questions, you're certainly welcome to do so. The mic will be up front, and I'll remind you of this, but please make sure you state your name and the grade level of your students. That'll help me answer questions for you if there's things building level specific. And also, Shelly's taking notes for me up front, so she'll be able to write those down as we go. But again, appreciate you coming out, and we'll go ahead and get started here. So the goals for this session tonight, share rationale for the why we're making additions to our grading practice, strengthen communication between school and families regarding our grading practices. Those are our two goals for this informational session with us or for us tonight. So hopefully by the end or when we're all done, we'll have hit both of those bullet points for you. So our beliefs, this is on your packet. It's on the very front page, but our beliefs when we talk about our grading practices, primary purpose of grading at Interstate 35 School District, Community School District, is to communicate information about student achievement to our students, parents, and others. Additional purposes of grading for us, to provide evidence of an individual student progress towards our district academic standards, to provide opportunities for students to self-assess, reflect, and set goals, and to provide parents accurate and meaningful evidence of their student growth and learning. Those are again on that front page if you care to reference back to those as far as beliefs and additional purposes. I didn't put that whole document up here just because it's a big document with lots, so wanted to give you a hard copy there, but hit the highlights up here. Covering a couple terms. Standard. So what is a standard? If you hear me refer to a standard or a power standard, the definition for that is up here on the board. It's an academic standards are what public schools students are expected to learn in reading, math, and other subjects. The majority of our core subjects, not the majority, all of our core subjects have state standards which are determined or given to us for our students to learn. The district has identified power standards for our students to learn. We do teach all of those standards. However, those power standards are what we are going to choose to measure as far as the walk away from the class, here's what you will know standards and means of measurement. So when you hear standard, that's what we're referring to. We're referring to that standard that has been identified either by the state or the other academic areas or content areas have had national standards. So, for example, ag and industrial tech, family consumer science, business, some of those CTE or career technical education programs, those may choose to use a national standard to measure their student achievement. All of them have standards. All of them will have those standards identified within the gradebook for you to be able to see and know what the unit measures at the end of the semester. You'll hear us talk about practice. Practice is also in reference to homework. So if you have practice opportunities, same as if you were out for a sport or if you were in a play, you go to practice to get better. Same as if you're in class, we will begin using practice as that option for kids when referencing homework. Assessment means assessment, a means of determining a student's understanding of a standard. This can look many different forms. I think the misconception or perception here is that an assessment is a standardized test. That is not necessarily the case, depending on the subject that you're in. Yes, a test may be applicable to determine the student's learning. However, there may be other means to do that, whether that's a project, whether that is a presentation, maybe it's a written, some sort of a written paper, but those can all look in different forms. But again, that's the flexibility of assessments when it comes to getting at the student, the understanding of your student as it pertains to a particular standard. GPA, most I think are familiar with that. GPA is grade point average. That's something that we determine at the end of the semester for your student. We do that now. We will continue to do that as well moving forward. And then a rubric. Rubric is a means to provide feedback to your student based on the unit assessment. So there's an example of a feedback inside your packet. It references the citizenship and employability rubric. So it's laid out in multiple categories as well as numbered, going from 4 down to 0 as far as what your student would display when it comes in terms of employability or citizenship. So I put that in there as an example of what a rubric looks like so that you can see that the criteria is laid out. So prior to a unit, your student or yourself even would have access to that unit so that you could see the rubric and how things are laid out. What is the expectation? The rubric should capture what the expectation is if your student wants to achieve a 4 or if they want to achieve a 3, or again, if they're achieving a 2 and they need to be provided some feedback, that would give them some specifics as far as why they earned that grade. So I put an example problem in here. So if you'll turn with me to the back of that stapled packet, we'll kind of work through this together. And the example problem here is so that you can see how this practice allows for us to gather some data back a little faster when it comes to student understanding. So the first two problems, it's about volume here. So these are the standards that are covered for this project. So this paper, this assessment, if you will, would assess volume of solid figures. That's problems 1 and 3. Convert among standard measurement units and use these conversions in a real-world problem. Those would be questions 2 and 4. So if you go back to your problems, you can see the problems talk about figuring out what the volume is for each of these problems. Again, 3 and 4 are just another example of what those could be. So then we can go back and see if we are to measure these two standards. This assessment would allow a quick snapshot for a teacher to be able to see where are my students at in understanding these two standards. So what happens next? A teacher can review the data of the assessment. They can then either A, move on as a whole group if you have 80% achievement or whatever that threshold may be for the teacher. If it shows good understanding, the majority of your class gets 4 out of 4, then we're ready to move on. If half of your class gets one of them right but is struggling in the application part, then we know we need to go back and revisit something. That doesn't mean that we hold up the whole group. That just means we have the data to know where to provide the support to those students in a specific area based on this one example. Did that example make sense? Do you have questions about the math example? 2 standards, identified over 4 problems. And again, it's just an example. So there may be 10 problems. 5 of them meet one standard, 5 of them meet another standard. But I wanted to give a quick example of what that could look like in a math classroom or in a classroom for you to see what we would do with that. So the second part here is if students show an understanding, then again, it's time to move on. Or we can go back and say, okay, if we fully understand it, here's how we apply it next. Whatever builds on each other would then be the next step for that teacher. What it also tells us is it'll give us the data to know whether your student understands. So we put that in PowerSchool. You can see that your student got 1 of 2 right or 1 of 4 of those right. They're probably going to have a 1 on their feedback because that's what it is for that given standard. And you can see at that point in time, here's what my student knows about specific standard A. If they get all of them right, you'll see that they have full understanding of that, and it's time for us to move on, or time for your student to move on within the class. Again, it gives us specific data so that we know how to best support your student when they're here at classroom, or on the flip side of that, you know how to support them when they're at home. I myself have sat in various conferences before and thought, how can I support my kid at home? within a specific area, this tells us what standard that we could be supporting them in, so that they can show their understanding greater as these assessments continue to circle back and measure the standards multiple times. So, does our current practice show a student's true understanding of standards? So again, another example for us to see what our current practice may or may not be telling us. If we look at the board up here on the left-hand side, we've just created a mock gradebook, but this shows what the first couple quizzes might lend us to believe as far as what our students understand. They may be improving, declining, consistent, poor start, good start, all of those categories we could create for any kid. The last one here might be cheating because they have all perfect grades. Because if we jump over to the next portion that assesses those various, what may be those standards, we could see these kids are either dropping off or they're picking up depending on their start. So in our current practice, as our gradebook currently stands, this would be assignment 1 or quiz 1, 2, test, project, again, all the above labels that you would see in the gradebook. When we look at this as a teacher, we take quick snapshots of what this looks like and we think, okay, kids individually are either improving, declining, whatever the case might be. But on average, when we take all of those numbers together, each of those students, whether we see it or don't see it, have a C+. So what we may think we're seeing in a gradebook may not be quite the perception that we truly want to see as teachers, and I'm speaking from a teacher's standpoint here, not necessarily from a student or parent standpoint. But if we take a look at how a standards gradebook would be set up, we can quickly see where our teachers or where our students are going to be or where they need support in specific areas based on the data that they're showing us. Here's a gradebook view. This is one of those questions that we've gotten over the last few days when we were sending information out. But the gradebook view that we currently see in our Power School setting. So if you log in to view, if I log in to see Aiden Castor's grades, here's what they would look like. This is not your gradebook, Aiden, just so you know. But this is what you would see. So course name, letter grade, that will not change for us. So if you're a parent that wants to log in and see your student's grade, where they're at in that given moment for whatever class, you will still log in and see a grade page just like this. Okay? Some parents, that's what you want to see, and that's perfectly okay. You just want to make sure that your student is keeping up with what they're doing. That's perfectly fine. If you want to dig into, okay, why do I have A's in everything else and C's in a couple areas? Well, we then click on that C, as most of you know, and it will open the gradebook so that you can see a greater understanding of what makes up that grade. And it would actually look very similar to this in the sense of it's going to show you the quizzes or the things that make up that gradebook. Whereas what we see now when we click on that grade, again, looks two different ways for us. We can click on that grade and see an assessment or a specific grade, or if we click on the standard portion, which is, if we are in English 9 right here, that would be the grade that we would see for English 9. It's going to bring up the standard that has been assessed for a given topic. Okay? Each of our units will be divided up in our gradebook so that you can see what the unit is and then how it's assessed, and it will just continue to break those down so that at the end of the semester, when I click on my English grade, it is English, I forgot what subject I actually picked, but if I pick on my English grade, I can see here are our power standards that have been measured, and here's how my son or daughter has fallen into those categories. Ultimately, these will be averaged together, in which will determine our overall semester grade. So as you're looking at this, again, the detail that this gives, as far as the definition of the standard, will fall under the unit. So whatever the unit project or unit that your student is doing, these will be measured multiple times throughout the semester so that your child has opportunity to continue growth within the semester. Tom Schimmer is a standards-based guy, but I thought this was applicable for this conversation. Changing grading practices doesn't mean that the practices of the past were wrong necessarily. Rather, they were wrong in today's context. What we used to do was right for how we used to teach, but we don't teach like that anymore. So when we're teaching, what we're talking about here is how we're instructing kids to be able to gather the knowledge or the understanding that they have of standards is different now than what it has been in the past. So this practice continues to evolve with the education practice as it currently sits. Again, to recap our beliefs, I'm not going to read those to you again. You have a printed copy in front of you for your reference. My rationale for changing the grading status quo. These are a couple just bullet points that I thought were important for us to make. But this grade correlation studies indicate that grades do not reflect our level of achievement, such as the ACT or AP type tests. The grades that our students are, or the results that our students are seeing are in the classroom are not necessarily correlated to what our students are showing on these testing or these ACT or advanced placement type assessments. Different gradebook setups within the courses and departments lead to grading inequities, meaning that if I've got a gradebook made up of 1,500 points for the semester versus someone else's gradebook that's made up of 100, that creates a little bit of a curve for a student and for parents to try and understand what actually makes up that gradebook. Parents and students, again, this is one of those bullets that I've heard from as far as disparities within grading practices and within the courses, including things such as late penalties or extra credit to kind of sway or curve a grade so that it reflects not what your student understands, but what your student is willing to do to raise their grade. And our goal is to make sure that we can show what their understanding is when they walk out of our doors. Here's a couple comparison things for you to take a look at. The 100-point scale defines 60 or more distinct levels of failure and only 40 or fewer levels of passing. As a result, students are more likely to be misclassified in terms of their performance, in particular on a particular assessment. When I look at this graphic, you can see them compared one over the other and see that there's oftentimes just as it states, 60 opportunities for failure versus 40 opportunities for passing. And then figuring out what does that number represent for us can sometimes be challenging because we look at an assessment that might be given that's worth 50 points. Well, what does that 50 points mean? It's probably given us a total number of points for each question that's on that assessment or each portion that's on that assessment, but what's it truly telling us? Whereas if we look at an opportunity to use a 4-point scale, or you could even call it 5 if you have an F in there, we can be very, very direct about what does that grade represent for our student. Again, just another comparison piece on a 100-point scale, a -6 a 0 on a 100-point scale is a -6 on a 4-point scale. If a student does no work, he should get nothing, not something worse than nothing, which again is how this correlates. But just another opportunity to see how they would represent next to each other in the means of assigning points versus assigning those scales. So what's changing versus what's not changing? In your packet as well, I believe on page 2, is a graphic there that will kind of explain this in greater depth than what it is here on the board. But what is changing? What is changing is we're creating a common grading philosophy for grades 5 through 12 to be able to provide feedback to students, to parents, and to teachers so that they have an understanding of what is being taught and how it's being measured within the classroom. The use of a common 4-point scale to score assignments or assessments, again, is one of those things that is changing for us. Grading scale, going from 100 points or whatever the teacher might be assigning for a specific grade down to that 4-point scale. And then consistent PowerSchool grading practices. So when you click in a gradebook, you understand what you're looking at, whether it's in English or math or science, whatever the subject might be for your son or daughter. What's not changing? Letter grades. We still assign letter grades. We will still be assigning a GPA. Those are both things that are required by us to be able to present to colleges when our students leave. So on a transcript, we have to put a letter grade on. We have to put a GPA on there. Some schools have done away with that up to some extent, but again, part of that is expectation for kids to be able to have when they enroll in college. So we will continue to provide those for our students. Again, what is not changing? Transcripts. Those will look for the same for us when they leave our classes at the end of their 12 school years. They will still get their transcript. They will still have the same information on it as they do today. RAI index, that's the index that is measured for students' intake into college, Division I type colleges. There's a whole set of criteria for the RAI index. Again, that's not changing for us either. And then scholarship opportunities. This would not impact our students in any manner when it comes to applying for scholarships or beginning their work towards their college dreams or work, whatever that might look like for them. This as well is in your packet, but I thought it is worth a slide of its own. The determining the grade and GPA. So if you look on the left-hand side of this chart here, of this table, this is our scale score down through and how it correlates to letter grade, and then again as percentage. This number on the left-hand side is the exact same that's set up in PowerSchool now. I sent in an email last week. We got some feedback from people on this is a concern. We want to make sure that it is equal for our students as they are getting ready to move on past school when they're done in the next couple years or whenever that might be for your student. So we went back and recalculated and said this works for us too. So this scale score is also in reference to a GPA, which again is the same as what it is in current practice now. So no adjustments, just a way for us again to measure and provide that feedback to our students. Yes, ma'am.
So the left-hand column is the GPA number?
Yep.
And the right-hand is, how do you calculate that percentage? Is that based on the 3, 4, 3, 2, 1s? Or how do you get that number?
This number right here?
Yes.
I'd have to go back. It's a PowerSchool generated number, so it would generate that. I'm trying to think how that would all work. Let me write. Let me clarify that for you, because I'm pretty sure it's generated through PowerSchool, and we set that up and say that this represents this. We determine that through PowerSchool. So it's not a hand jam calculation, it's a PowerSchool calculation. But I'll confirm that for you. So just a couple questions that I thought I'd throw on here to make sure that we covered before we're all done. But can my students still earn an A in class? Yes. Absolutely, they can earn an A. Any student that earns anything above a 93% within a classroom or within a class, that is considered an A for us. Anything, and you saw it on this scale as well. So that A is a 3.3 for us in the 4-point scale. That again translates to an A. Same is true whether or not you are in a class that uses a 4-point scale. So some of our classes, as we transition into this practice, we're providing professional development for our teachers from starting August, whatever date we return to school, through January 15th or 16th, which is the start of the second semester, so they can begin developing their understanding of how this applies to their classroom. So that starts for us as soon as our teachers return in August, and they will begin, they meet 2 days a week to do the unit planning for the second semester, so that when we're ready to implement this practice, they've had an opportunity to build out their units so that it fits this design. So first semester, the majority of your classes, maybe besides English, would look the same as what it has looked in the past year. And then as we get into second semester, again, that's when the majority of those programs will be running or their first portion of implementation for this practice. My student is earning a 2 on some skills. Should I be worried? Again, that applies differently to each student, to each family. If your student is achieving a 2 right out of the gates, I think that's absolutely normal because they're developing their understanding in whatever the standard is. Does that mean by the end of the semester they should still be earning a 2? I hope not, because our goal is to provide support for those students and intervention to help that student develop their understanding for when we are all done with this semester. But again, if your student is not achieving where either A, you want them to be, or B, where they're trying to achieve, then I think this last piece here, any question about that progress for your student, same as what you see now in the gradebook, reach out to your teacher or the teacher of that certain class and gain an understanding. If you can't see what's going on in the gradebook, reach out to them, set up a time to meet with them so that they can explain what's going on, because there may be something else there that's not represented in the gradebook, or they can give you a little more feedback on. But again, the goal is to help those students grow. So at the beginning of each class, they likely will not have mastered all of those standards. But again, as the course continues on, they will be able to display their mastery of the standard. Does this mean I-35 is implementing standards-based grading? I've heard about other schools doing this and want to learn more. Again, standards-based grading for us will be, the goal is to provide support for our teachers in the first semester, begin their implementation process in the second semester, and then kind of refine anything that needs to happen within their content areas by the end of second semester. And so yes, we do plan to implement this. At the end of the day, however, standards-based grading, there's not a one-size-fits-all package for schools to implement. You can't go pick up a manual that says, here's what this should look like. There's a whole lot of research out there that says, here's what best practice is, but it's our job to figure out what that looks like for our school district. So that's what we've been spending the last semester working on with our English department. That's what we plan to work through with the other departments in the fall semester. So again, we can work to implement in the spring semester. Okay, 27 minutes, so I didn't do too bad on that half-hour time mark, but want to give an opportunity if people have questions. You're welcome to come up and ask those questions. Again, I just remind you, please let us know your name, what grade level you have students in, and then state your question. If it's something that I can answer right now, Sharon's up in the booth as well. If it's something she can answer, then one or the other will do our best. If we can't, just like your question about calculation, I'll dig into it and get you an answer responded back. So. Questions at this time, you guys can come down one at a time and ask those questions, and we'll go from there.